UFC Fight Night, Lewis vs Nascimento is on this weekend, and I'll be giving you my full predictions and breakdown for every single fight on the card, kicking it off with Veronica Hardy versus JJ Aldrich. Now, both of them have pretty heavy Taekwondo styles. Hardy's a 5-time American national Taekwondo champion, and Aldrich is a black belt as well. Now, when we look at Hardy, she's got very good movement, very good along the outside, especially since she's come back from that 3 years off. She's been looking very good. She's got a bit of momentum on her side, but she is a very small 125er. We see there's the 3.5 reach advantage here for JJ Aldrich, and when it comes to that reach advantage, I think it's very good, it's very decisive in this matchup specifically because of the jab. Aldrich has a very good jab, and she's just a bit more fluent with her striking in general compared to Veronica Hardy. And it's important because they are both southpaws. They're both same stance fighters, so we get to see that hand fight there. And I think when it comes to that reach advantage and having that jab, JJ Aldrich is just going to have a lot easier of a time being able to land her strikes. And I think her striking level is just a bit better overall. She's got more experience on her side. She's got 8 years in the UFC, and she's got pretty decent takedowns as well. She showed that against Erin Blanchfield when they fought. Obviously, she did get submitted, but it still shows that she has that ability to take it to the ground, even against someone that is so good at grappling like Erin Blanchfield, which we know Erin is definitely better than Veronica Hardy, so she does have that option there. And yeah, Veronica is looking good, but Aldrich is just a little bit more advanced with her striking. She's a fair bit bigger than Veronica as well, and I think that will allow her to get the better of the clinch work as well. So I think ultimately, in pretty much all avenues except for the specific submission threat, I'd give the submission threat to Veronica, but I have to give every other avenue to JJ Aldrich in this one, and I think she'll take it by decision. Moving up to Jared Gooden versus Kevin Jousset. Unfortunately, this fight got canned. It got canned because of a medical issue for Gooden. Honestly, Gooden needs to move up to 185. He's missed weight 3 times now at welterweight. He missed one of them by 3 pounds, and then I believe the other one he missed by 6 pounds. So it's pretty rough for Jousset because he weighed in 10 minutes before he needed to, and he made the weight. And honestly, I think that Jousset, going off the prediction for this fight that I had, I think Jousset is just more technically sound than Gooden, and I think he honestly would have won the fight if this fight actually happened, and he would have won it by decision, and it would have got him that much closer to that top 15 spot. I mean, he is making a name for himself at the moment. He's got good momentum as well, and yeah, it's just really unfortunate we couldn't get this one. Moving on though, Charles Johnson versus Jake Hadley. This one's definitely difficult to call. They are pretty evenly matched, especially physically, with the height and their reach. I mean, their reach is just identical, but I think Johnson struggles on the back foot, and Hadley is a very, very forward pressure-oriented fighter. So I think when it comes to being able to pressure, he'll be able to get the better of the striking exchanges, because I think Hadley will be able to get Johnson on the back foot. And he's much more aggressive with his submissions. And I think if he can drop Johnson, then he can definitely find a submission there. When we look at them comparatively, we have the fight. They both fought Cody Durden. And I think that Hadley fought Cody Durden better than Johnson did. Durden kept Johnson on the back foot, whereas Hadley kept Durden on the back foot. And Durden is a very offensive wrestler. He relies heavily on grinding out the opponent, and he was struggling a lot to do that with Hadley compared to Johnson. He was basically just ragdolling Johnson. But when we look at Johnson in his career, he's never been finished, and he's definitely faster and more explosive than Hadley, which could definitely give him a chance in an exchange. But Hadley just has a very good chin, and he is very good defensively overall. He doesn't absorb too much comparatively, I think he's actually pretty good when it comes to the flyweight division. He doesn't actually absorb that many strikes. Obviously, it's a high volume, it's a high output division, and comparatively, he is very good with his striking defense and his submission defense, of course. And yeah, I think he will pull away with a decision, or possibly late he could get a submission, but I think he will most likely get a decision in this one. Moving up, Billy Goff versus Trey Waters. Now, there's a huge difference for Trey Waters just when it comes to the size. Trey Waters is 6'5", and then we've got Goff, who's 5'10". Trey Waters got a 5-inch reach advantage, but Goff is like a freight train. He won his last 5 fights by KO, with only one of those fights going to a second round, but he almost got finished in the Contender Series by a brutal head kick. He literally just leaned into the head kick about 20 seconds into the fight, and he just got straight floored, but his recovery is ridiculous. He's shown that a lot through his what's happened with him through the UFC and on the regional scene as well. He's got very good recovery, and he has a lot of KO power as well. He does have pretty piss poor strike defense, I can't lie, and he relies on that power heavily and his durability, which was definitely evident in his last fight with Kinoshita, and he just struggles overall with that technical striking, and Waters is that technical striker. He really likes to slow down the pace of his fights, and in the Quinlan fight that he showed that he has really nice backstep counters, which Goff definitely would leave himself open for when he pressures forward and tries to get in those exchanges. That's just his style. He likes to forward pressure, get them against the cage, and just swing. It's definitely effective when it comes to the stylistic matchup for Waters, but I honestly, in this matchup, I don't think it will matter. I think Goff is just so extremely durable and has amazing recovery. And I think when it comes to Waters, yeah, he does have that good counter-striking, but I don't think he has that real KO power to go with it as well. And Waters keeps his right hand very low. So it's like that trade-off. Like, he keeps it very low so then he can get like a snap jab or a snap straight very quickly, depending on obviously what stance he's in. So he can obviously get that strike through very quickly, but then he leaves himself open defensively, which would not surprise me if they do get an exchange, especially if Goff can actually pressure him against the cage. I think that he will be able to finish him with a hook there, and I think that Goff will get that KO TKO, and I think he'll get it around round 1. And honestly, when you look at Trey Waters' fight, a big issue with him is his movement. He's very reliant on like his upper body movement. He's got pretty decent head movement and counter striking there, but when it comes to his actual legs and like physically moving, circling out, I just haven't really seen it that much. Well, at least in his recent fights. So yeah, and I think if he's not doing that, it's a bad matchup for him if he's fighting someone that has that KO power and forward pressure like Goff. Moving up, Tabatha Ricci versus Tecia Pennington. Now, Ricci is pretty decent, but she just hasn't fought the same caliber of fighter that Tecia's fought, except for Lupi Godinez, who outpointed her, and Manon Fiorot, who absolutely destroyed her when she moved up to flyweight. And Tecia's been around for ages. She's been around since 2015, 16. She was on the Tough series, and she's fought, like, especially back then, that was like mainly what the UFC had in terms of top talent, because they were funneling all the female fighters from Invicta. And yeah, they were the best of the best at that point in time, and she still stayed pretty consistent at the top of the division for pretty much her whole career. And yeah, it's just there's a big experience difference there. Now, Tecia is obviously coming off that 2-year layoff after having her baby, which can definitely complicate her performance in so many different ways. But she is very defensively sound, especially on the ground. I mean, we've seen that against Mackenzie Dern. Mackenzie Dern's obviously her best game as a submission threat, definitely not her boxing. And like Ricci thrives when it comes to the ground game, not her striking game. She thrives. She's got a judo background, judo discipline, and she's 3-0 with her submissions. So she would rather get it to the ground, that's for sure. But yeah, when we look at Tecia, she's got a lot more experience. She's very defensively sound on the ground, and I think Tecia as well, when it comes to the physical matchup here, I think she's strong enough to deal with Ricci quite comfortably. Tecia's very small, 60.5-inch reach, 5'1", and she's been dealing with larger fighters throughout her career, but pretty much everyone she's fought has been bigger than her, and she's been able to deal with that strength and size fairly well through most of those fights. But Ricci is the same size as her, so I think that she will definitely be able to get the better of those clinch situations. Ricci does have a pretty good chance of getting something off in the clinch, though. I believe she's 12-0 in Muay Thai, so she definitely does have that possibility there in the striking department, which is the clinch. I think she could do the most damage there compared to being at like a boxing or kickboxing range. But I think that Tecia is, ultimately she's just better on the feet in general. She has a karate background and a taekwondo black belt as well. And she's very good at managing that distance with her front leg side kick too. And I just think she will utilize that striking versatility overall to beat Ricci to a decision win. Moving on, Terrance McKinney versus Esteban Ribovics. Now, this fight is not going to go the distance. Between the two of them, they have only had 2 decisions in 34 fights. And those 2 decisions have been in Ribovics' last 2 fights. Now, McKinney has a 4.5-inch reach advantage with power to go along with it. But as we've seen in his last few performances, he has been fighting pretty good opponents. I mean, he's had Drew Dober, Bonfim, Matt Frivola, but he's just very inconsistent with those performances, and he's taken a lot of damage in those performances as well. When we look at his fight against Drew Dober, I mean, he had Drew Dober in a lot of trouble, but then Drew Dober obviously came back and punished him a fair bit with some ground and pound. And then obviously there's Ismail Bonfim as well, who just flatline destroyed him with that flying knee. And coming back from that, you always wonder, is his chin going to be okay? That's why I have listed in that weakness there. I mean, he's not that old. He's pretty young. He's 29. But when you take a shot like that, you just don't know if that chin's going to hold up, at all throughout the rest of his career. Now, when we look at Esteban, he has pretty poor takedown defense, but when it comes to getting to the ground, he's very fluid in his ground transitions, especially when he utilizes his Kimura. So he utilizes the Kimura more so to sweep, but he can still lock them in for an actual submission win. And I think that he's able to use the Kimura to, obviously ground transitions in general, to keep himself fairly safe against McKinney. And I think Esteban just definitely shines when he doesn't have to fight a dominant wrestler like he did against Ruziboev 2 fights ago, which is that decision loss that he did have. And McKinney isn't a dominant wrestler. And when we look at Esteban's pros, he has very good power, especially when he fights at boxing range. He's very much, when he takes one, he'll give one back like twice as hard, especially when he is in that boxing range. He has a very good chin as well. He has been, his striking defense he's similar to Goff. He's pretty piss poor striking defense. He's been cracked multiple times in the last few fights that I've seen, but he has not been dropped. He has a very good chin. And ultimately, when it comes to this fight, stylistically, I think whoever puts who on the back foot will get knocked out. But I think Esteban's chin will hold up in the exchanges, whereas McKinney's, I don't think it will. And yeah, that's just attributed to the damage that McKinney has taken over the last few fights that he's had with Dober and Bonfim. And yeah, I think when it comes to that and those exchanges, which I think they will get in those exchanges, I honestly have Esteban to get a KO TKO in round 1 or round 2. Moving on, Chase Hooper versus Borschev. Now, Hooper has picked up a couple good wins recently. He's definitely got the submission threat advantage in this one, and he has a 5-inch reach advantage to go along with it as well. So he can possibly utilize the range on the feet, but it is tough. Honestly, I just think Borschev, I don't think this is a good matchup for Chase Hooper, to be honest. I think Borschev is just too powerful, and I don't think Hooper will be able to deal with the aggression and especially the striking accuracy of Borschev. Borschev is very, very good with his kickboxing. He's very credited in the kickboxing space, and I think for Hooper, it's pretty plain and simple here. He needs to get the fight to the ground. But when we look at Borschev, especially in the fight against Sadikov, he did have pretty underrated takedown defense. And as an orthodox fighter, his leg kicks, mainly his outside lead leg kick, against a southpaw like Chase Hooper, works extremely well at disrupting the opponent's striking rhythm, which he showed against Sadikov. And if he can do that against Chase Hooper, that's going to nullify Chase Hooper's reach, especially with his jab. So that's going to be where it's even more evident that Chase Hooper needs to get this fight to the ground. But I ultimately just don't see Chase Hooper getting the fight where he needs to get it. I don't see him getting the fight to the ground, and I think Borschev is just going to wear him down with that high-level kickboxing, and I think he's just going to wear him down, especially in that first round, and then I can just see him landing a really clean body shot, and I think he finishes him by KO or TKO in the second or the third round. Moving on to the main card, we have Waldo Cortes-Acosta versus Robelis Despaigne. Now, Cortes-Acosta isn't super defensively sound, but he did take some big shots, especially in that De Lima fight, and he eats them pretty well. He's got a pretty decent chin, and he's not only quicker than any of Despaigne's opponents, but he's overall just better than any of Despaigne opponents that he's had. But Despaigne is just a freak. He's a high-level striker. He's got very good Taekwondo background, and he's got the speed as well, especially being at that size. He's got a 9-inch reach advantage as well. He's just a lot bigger. The frame's bigger. And I think for this fight, I think it is a great test for Despaigne, fighting someone that is quicker than anyone that he's fought before, and for Cortes-Acosta, who has never been finished as well. But I just don't think Cortes-Acosta will stop him. And it is difficult to know what Despaigne's gas tank is going to be like. He hasn't gone past the first round in any of his fights. And it's just going to be interesting to see if Costa can take him to a second round, which I honestly think Cortes-Acosta can, because he's not one of those normal heavyweight fighters that doesn't use a lot of movement. Cortes-Acosta is pretty good on the outside, very good with his linear movement, but it's going to be very interesting to see what the gas tank might look like for Despaigne if he gets pushed into the second round. But big issue for like most heavyweights, which is with Cortes-Acosta as well, is that we haven't seen a very offensive ground game from him. So I think, honestly, I do think without that offensive ground game, and assuming he doesn't have one, I think Despaigne will still be able to get that KO, but I do think it'll be early in the second round. Moving up, Alex Caceres versus Sean Woodson. Now, I am going to be taking Woodson on this one. Caceres is a very fun fighter. He's had a lot of experience. He was on Tough, and ever since Tough, he's maintained being in the UFC. He's a veteran in the UFC. He's fought very good fighters. But I just think that Sean Woodson is just so much more technically sound. They are both very composed fighters as well, but Woodson has the 4.5 inch reach advantage, that he definitely knows how to use effectively. We've seen that against Charles Jourdain in his last fight, and we've seen that in some of his past fights as well. And yeah, like the only real way I see Caceres winning this fight is if he is able to, use those unorthodox strikes to his advantage, which I genuinely just don't think he will. I think Sean Woodson is just way too composed. He needs to get it to the ground, realistically. If he can get Woodson to the ground, he might have a chance there. But on the feet, I just have Woodson getting a clear 30-27 unanimous decision, which is fantastic for him because that will take him to that 15th rank and take Caceres out of it. Moving up, Diego Ferreira versus Mateusz Rebecki. Now, Diego Ferreira did have a very good finish against Michael Johnson. Overhand right, straight to the chin, flatlined him stiff in his last fight. But he is 39 years old and he's taken a fair amount of damage in his career. Before the Johnson fight, he did take 2 years off as well. Whereas Rebecki has pretty much looked unstoppable and hasn't lost in 10 years and is on a 16-fight win streak. I just don't think this is a good matchup for Ferreira in this stage of his career and being at that age. And yes, Rebecki does have a considerable reach disadvantage, an 8-inch reach disadvantage, which is huge. But the way Rebecki fights stylistically, you would think that having a 66-inch reach at lightweight is just like, why are you not at featherweight? But when it comes to Rebecki's style, he has very good forward pressure and he's got very clean head movement, which allows him to get inside very easily. And then when he's inside, he has that advantage over most of his opponents. Now, when it comes to the submission game, I think they can both cancel each other out pretty well. They both have strong BJJ bases, but I think if it does come to that ground game, Rebecki is very strong, and I think Rebecki has the strength advantage, and then Ferreira has the transitional advantage. But I think Rebecki will be able to use that strength to control him in most positions, if not all of them. I mean, you look at his fight against Ruziboev. Ruziboev is a very dominant, pacey wrestler, and he was just able to bully Ruziboev with forward pressure and finish him pretty easily in that fight as well. So it kind of shows that in a perspective sense. Like, Ferreira isn't really a forward pressure dominant fighter, whereas Ruziboev is, and Rebecki was able to completely 180 him and just dominate him. So I don't see Ferreira being able to really impose much in this fight, and ultimately I think Rebecki will just, especially with his striking, he's got very versatile striking. He's good at striking. He's good at mixing up his strikes. I think Rebecki will be able to tear his legs down with the inside kicks. He has very heavy inside kicks, and then he'll rip the body. And then I think, just by tearing Diego Ferreira down, going from legs to body, I think he'll find the opportunity to just chin him. I think he'll be able to chin him against the cage, and it'll happen around the second round, I reckon. I just don't see much hope for Ferreira getting a win in this fight, to be honest. Moving up, Alonzo Menifield versus Carlos Ulberg. Now, this fight, I think, will be much more competitive than people think. And I think it'll definitely be one of the best fights on the card. When you look at Menifield, he's a 3-1 underdog, but he's fought better competition than Ulberg, and he's had pretty competitive fights and has decent momentum at the moment. I mean, he's put away Jimmy Crute, and he almost destroyed Dustin Jacoby. That was a very competitive fight, but Jacoby had him in a bit of trouble at points, but he just came back, and even him being tired, he was exhausted, but he still has so much power. And a big takeaway from the Jacoby fight as well for Menifield is that stylistically, Jacoby is very similar to Carlos Ulberg. I mean, Jacoby and Ulberg are both like lengthier fighters and have the reach advantage over Alonzo Menifield. And that, just stylistically, they're both kickboxers. They're pretty much identical in that space. And when we look at Menifield in that fight with Jacoby and pretty much most of the fights in his career, his power and his durability are the main reasons behind his wins, and that is what he relies on. But he isn't the quickest fighter, or he's definitely not the most technical moving forward as well. He's very good at he's actually very good on the back foot because he's I mean, against Dustin Jacoby, he had very good counter striking. That's what hurt Dustin Jacoby when Menifield was on the back foot more so. And that's because Menifield has very good head movement. He has very good head movement when he's moving back and slipping shots and then countering. And that is something that Carlos Ulberg is extremely good at. And I would say is better than Alonso Menifield at. Ulberg has very crisp kickboxing and is a lot quicker and has the KO power similar to Menifield. I'll give Menifield the KO power advantage in this one, but Ulberg definitely has the speed there. Now, Ulberg, just like I said with Jacoby, is the lengthier fighter. So I think in this fight, he needs to use, which Jacoby should have done, he needs to use a lot of body kicks and leg kicks to keep himself at range and then force Menifield to come in. Ulberg's best chance by a mile is to have Menifield pressuring him back. Because Ulberg's best shot, if you look at any of his fights, is his lead hand. Especially like his backstep lead hook counter with his left hand is a thing of beauty. He pretty much has finished all his wins in the UFC starting with that strike. He's dropped most of his opponents with that left hook. And if he cuts down the gas tank of Menifield and the movement, I think he honestly can and will do, I think he can get that round 2 or round 3 finish by KO TKO, but it would not surprise me at all if Menifield is able to pull through with a KO, especially if Ulberg does get complacent by any means. If any fighter gets complacent against Menifield, they can easily get knocked out. Doesn't matter if Menifield's tired or not. That's probably the most impressive trait about him. But I honestly think that the technical ability of Ulberg is going to be able to get this one done. Moving on to the co-main event, Joaquin Buckley versus Nursultan Ruziboev. Now, if this fight, just like the Terrance McKinney fight, if this fight goes near the distance, I'll be very surprised. When we look at this fight, a lot of people have been talking about Ruziboev specifically and him moving down in weight at that height, being 6'5", thinking that he won't make the weight, which at this point in time, he has made the weight. But the thing with Ruziboev is that he has had at least 14 fights at welterweight beforehand up until 2021. And he's actually had one at lightweight in 2014, which he won by a rear naked choke. So, I mean, that just shows how, like, the difference that he's had in his frame over time. Like, someone that's 6'5" fighting at lightweight is ridiculous. I'm sure he wasn't that height at that point. But, I mean, it just shows that versatility and how good he is with his weight cuts as well. But when we look at Ruziboev specifically in the welterweight division, he has lost at least half of those fights, with one of them being by a finish. And I think it will definitely make him more chinny. Yeah, he can have a good weight cut, but I do think that, you know, his chin is not going to be as good at welterweight than it is at middleweight. He's obviously more filled out. He's not as drained. And when you are that, your chin will suffer. And that's just not what you want against a Buckley who has had a heap of confidence and momentum moving down to welterweight. However, though, when it comes to Buckley, I don't think his wins have actually been that impressive at welterweight. He took Morono to a decision. He destroyed Fialho, but everybody has destroyed Fialho. And then Vicente Luque booted his fight IQ out of the damn arena when they fought. I don't know what the hell he was doing. I don't know why Luque pulled guard. Just made absolutely no sense. He had no advantageous position there. And Buckley just had free shots on his dome. Like, it was like the moment he pulled guard, 3 seconds in, I'm like, well, he's done. He's just destroyed. So, yeah, ultimately, the fights could have been better for him at welterweight, especially with Luque in terms of the performance. But yeah, I'm not overall impressed with those fights. Yes, he's won them all, but I think when we're looking at the odds, I think this fight should honestly be a straight pick'em. And I think that this fight is actually pretty bad stylistically for Buckley. Buckley, especially in the Morono fight, he has a knack of rushing in without keeping his guard up. And against Morono, he got tagged multiple times. If he does that against Ruziboev, I think he's going to get flatlined. And I think, especially with the build up to this fight, I think his confidence, it's hard to say, obviously, and he'll shut me up clearly if he does get this finish, but I think his confidence can definitely be mistaken for cockiness in this one. And honestly, I think Ruziboev is going to find the finish in this one. And I think the weight cut will definitely give Joaquin Buckley that chance to finish him. So either way, I think that there will be a finish here. But I honestly, just in terms of being technically sound and the way that the fight is stylistically, I have Ruziboev finishing this by KO TKO in round 1. Now, I would not be surprised at all if especially if Ruziboev gets Buckley on his back. He's 20-1 with submissions. Like, let's be honest, Ruziboev could definitely get this submission finish as well. Obviously, Buckley is 0-0 with submission game. We don't know exactly with his submission defense how good he is, but if you're fighting someone that's 20-1, has almost double the experience, if not, well, I think he does have double the experience, or over double the experience than Buckley has. I mean, yeah, I just have Ruziboev in this one, and it wouldn't surprise me if it's a submission win either. Moving on to the main event, Derek Lewis versus Rodrigo Nascimento. Now, I would be more confident with Nascimento in this fight if this fight was happening before the Jailton Almeida fight with Lewis, because Nascimento's best chance of getting this fight done is by submission. But the trade-off is if he makes mistakes position-wise, Lewis will drill his head through the bloody canvas. I mean, that was very close to happening with Jailton Almeida, and Jailton Almeida is a much more transitionally aware and advanced grappler than Nascimento is. So there is more likelihood for Nascimento to make a mistake there. And when it comes to making that mistake, Jailton Almeida is a lot smaller. So he has the ability to get up, which he did. He got out of the bad position very quickly. Whereas Nascimento is bigger. And he's not as big as Lewis, but he is bigger. And if he does make that mistake, it's going to be a lot harder for him to get out of that bad position. And when we look at the Almeida fight, Lewis was actually very composed on the ground. I know he was kind of just laying there most points, but the thing that you need to take away from the Lewis versus Jailton Almeida fight is that Lewis was very composed, and it was over 25 minutes and did not give up positions. He didn't give Jailton Almeida the positions he needed to get those finishes. And I honestly just see Lewis being able to take this on the feet. He's got the experience over him. Yes, he's 8 years older, but honestly, I think Lewis just definitely has that experience in there and that KO power, especially in those exchanges. And I mean, let's be honest, if Lewis has had his Popeyes, he'll be bloody fine. Now, Nascimento does have decent boxing, but he's not nearly as fast as fighters that Lewis has fought, like Cyril Gane, like Alex Volkov, like Sergey Pavlovich, and like Jailton Almeida as well. And when we do look at Nascimento, he does have the good momentum, but if he's getting finished by Chris Daukaus in 45 seconds, I honestly think Lewis will finish him somewhere in 25 minutes. And I think that he will secure that round 1 or round 2 KO in an exchange when Nascimento pressures Lewis against the cage. Moving on to the fight card awards with fight of the night, we have Alonzo Menifield versus Carlos Ulberg. I'm giving it to them because I believe that Ulberg's technical ability and power against Menifield's durability and power, it'll definitely end in a finish. But I think just when you're looking at them stylistically, I think there will be a lot of damage leading up to that finish. And I mean, it's also a part of stakes as well. You look at if Menifield wins, he'll be able to solidify that top 15 position that he has. and he'll be able to get that top 10 ranked opponent next, especially if he's beating an up-and-comer that's got a lot of hype behind him like Ulberg. And then for Ulberg, if he wins, he breaks into the top 15. Now, moving on to performance of the night, I'm going to give it to Nursultan Ruziboev. If Buckley just doesn't fight smart and becomes over-aggressive, I think it gives a huge opportunity to Ruziboev to put on a clinic. And I think it is going to happen. I'm more leaning towards that cockiness of Joaquin Buckley. And I think that, I think Ruziboev will put on that clinic, and I think he'll get a first or second round finish in that one. Moving on to fighter to watch, I'm going to give it to Mateusz Rebecki. I think he will get one of the best finishes on the card. And beating Ferreira, who has fought some of the best lightweights in the division throughout his career, will definitely put Rebecki on notice in his division. I think a lot of the time when you're fighting up in the UFC, and then you fight someone that has been fairly well known, and like they don't have to be at their prime or anything at this point, but when they're a veteran and they have a very good track record, they have a career filled with fights of the top fighters, which Ferreira has, it really pushes them up and puts them on notice in their division. And I think that this fight and this opportunity for Rebecki is just going to be great for his career. Now, looking at finish of the night, I'm going to give it to Billy Goff. Now, this one was definitely tough to decide on because most of the fights, especially deeper into this card as we've gone through, I think pretty much most, if not all of them, will end up in a finish. Like, it's just going to be I think it's going to be a great card, and I think it's definitely a great one for the OG fans, but I do think when it comes to an up-and-comer like Billy Goff, I think this is just going to be a great moment for him, and I think he is going to get the best finish here. I think it's just really set up for him if he can press Trey Waters against the cage and catch Trey Waters if he does have his hands low like he normally does. He has that tendency as a counter striker. And with Goff's power, I think he could get, honestly, the most brutal KO on the feet. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more MMA content, please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.